Preservation Panel, and I also sit on the Trunk Preservation Board. My question is to all three candidates. Two major examples of modern architecture in North York have been lost recently. To date, one has been demolished. Both were listed on the City of Toronto's inventory of heritage properties. Neither would have been saved by the new City of Toronto Act, which gives some protection to listed properties. And another modern example under threat is the Riverdale Hospital, known now as the Bridgepoint Health Centre, was also not listed because for many years it was considered unnecessary to protect old architecture. My question: if elected or re-elected, will you allocate the support necessary resources to enable preservation of modern architectural properties that meet the criteria of the Ontario Heritage Act, so that in future buildings like the Barrow International Building and the Inn on the Park continue to be part of Toronto's streetscape?
James will start this round.
I think I'm the one that's the most involved in this because the Inn on the Park is bordering my ward, that's Jenkins' ward, and the Nevada building was in my ward. What we discovered through this whole exercise is that when that inventory was accumulated in North York, apparently the owners of the buildings were never consulted. The benefit is that we now have gone through some of the buildings in the list, and we have the opportunity to actually list and I think even designate some of them, so they're protected now more so than before. This also raised some owners coming to the Preservation Board and raising issues such as the buildings have been dramatically changed or whatever, and they opposed it. I think what I've learned through this is that before we list and designate, especially a good number of buildings, it's important to involve the owners and not take them by surprise. And I will also say, I will admit to this, is I find it easier to protect and preserve buildings that are 100 years plus or older, and I guess I am stuck in the sense that I appreciate a certain type of architecture. I didn't feel as moved by this list because a lot of them are concrete and, you know, it's just a personal taste thing. I do think, though, that that many people, since the Inn on the Park has been demolished, raised their concerns. It was a sentimentally appealing building, a lot of memories associated with it. You know, some of it has been preserved, but the part that people miss most was the part that was apparently, according to reports, in a state of deterioration. And so this is the challenge, whether we can justify keeping, when buildings have been let go, it's harder to justify keeping them. And as you know, that's going to be a car dealership, which will somewhat, they're trying to duplicate the architecture. It will never be the same. So that was a learning process, but hopefully in the future, we can avoid what happened.
Stephen,
there is no, in my view, there's no blanket policy that we can just sort of lay across the city to deal with the problems that you brought up. It has to be on a case-by-case basis. And it takes some care and negotiation because you're dealing with somebody's private property. And so even if it's designated and it's worth, you know, whatever properties are thrown up, just take that example of the Inn in the Park. I don't know what it's worth, but it's probably hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's and you can't just say, well, you can't do anything with it. And so, you know, and also it's not, no city has the budget to go and say, well, we like it so much, we're going to buy it from you. You know, that's not a workable solution either. So in every solution or every situation, you have to have some levers, the tools, and the city does have some tools. And part of the answer is in zoning and bonusing, and it has to be done with sensitivity. But you have to make a concerted effort to do so, to preserve some of the buildings. It's not always going to work. I'm not going to try to say we're going to have a new blanket over the city. But it does take some care and some negotiations. And again, it's political will to do that, to carry it out.
David Miller.
As I took your question, what was it? I just want to make sure I got it correct. Will we commit to strengthening the designation process so we get ahead of what's happening? Am I correct? Is that what you were really asking?
Well, absolutely. In the two cases that I referred to, both the buildings were listed. The new City of Toronto Act would have given the 60 days to allow the city to then consider designation. But again, not necessarily was the will, and it isn't the mayor, it is the city council that would have to vote to designate, so it's a little more complicated.
Well, my approach over the past 3 years has been to allow these kinds of issues to work with the local council, in the case of Bada, it would have been Councillor Pitfield, in the case of the Park, Councillor Jenkins, because they're the expression of their community with heritage services and the owner. And I think perhaps one of the things I can commit to and should commit to as mayor is doing a better job ensuring the role of heritage preservation is strengthened, because they're representing the citywide interest in preservation. That interest has to really be predominant on these kinds of issues. We do have a challenge with modernist buildings. The park, for example, is purpose-built, and it gives a real challenge. The half-round building, it's a very interesting one. I know there are people in this room who disagree with me on this because I know them really well. But one of the things you got out of what's happening at Riverdale is the Don Jail is being put back in the area around it is being put back in a way that fits the Don Jail's heritage and is reintroducing it to the community. And I think I wanted to mention that example because there are trade-offs. The half-round, the build, floor-to-ceiling house, for example, purpose-built as a hospital, modern, great thing in many ways. There are trade-offs, but often complex ones. And I think, first of all, we have to strengthen the role of heritage preservation so we get ahead of it, and I think that's what you're suggesting in terms of designation. Secondly, we have to recognize that on some complex sites, there may be other wins we get on a heritage basis. And in the Riverdale Hospital, we got some other things. The Don Jail and a couple other buildings being sited in a way that fits their heritage instead of looking out over parking lots as they did before.